Captain Charles Plumb was a Navy fighter pilot in Vietnam. He flew 75 successful combat missions, but on number 76, his plane was hit by a surface-to-air missile and exploded. Somehow he was able to eject and safely parachute to the ground, where he was captured by the enemy forces. And after spending 6 years in a Vietnamese prison, he was released to come back to the United States, where he went on to live a normal life. Many years later, he was in a restaurant with his wife. This man came up and said, "I know who you are. You're Captain Charles Plumb. You flew fighter jets off the U.S. Kitty Hawk in Vietnam. I remember when you got shot down and you had to parachute to the ground." Captain Plumb was amazed that he knew so many details. He said, "Who are you and how do you know all that?" He said, "I was in the Navy, a sailor on that same ship where you would take off from. I was the one that packed your parachute." Captain Plumb got up and gave him a big hug, and they talked and reminisced for a few minutes. Then they said goodbye and went their separate ways. That night, Captain Plumb couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the man he had met in the restaurant. He wondered what he might have looked like years ago in a sailor uniform. He thought about how many times he must have passed him on the ship and never acknowledged him, never said hello, good morning, how are you? See, Captain Plumb was a fighter pilot. He was at the top of his field, respected. Everyone looked up to him. This other man, nothing wrong with him, he was fine, but he was a sailor. He wasn't at Captain Plumb's same level, so back then, Captain Plumb didn't give him the time of day. Now it grated on his conscience. He thought about all the lonely hours that sailor must have spent in the hull of the ship, carefully sewing the fabric together, making sure the parachute was just right, then folding it perfectly, going to great lengths to make sure it was as precise as could be, knowing that somebody's life could depend on it. Now Captain Plumb has a new appreciation for this man. He goes around the world asking people, "Who's packing your parachute? Who's behind the scenes making you look good? Who's investing in you? Who's making your life easier?" Like Captain Plumb, are you walking by people every day at the house, at the office, at the school, and you don't realize how instrumental they are in your life? They seem kind of insignificant, but if you didn't have them, if they didn't do a good job, if they weren't there, your life would be much more difficult. Don't see them as secondary. You didn't get here by yourself. All along the way, people have been packing your parachute.